All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last Urban Living Unlocked webinar of the year. Today, we are going to be looking forwards to 2026 and discussing some of the trends that we think are going to make the headlines across the living sector. My name's George Sell. I'm the editor of Urban Living News, and we are an online B2B platform for the living and flex office workspaces. We also organise events and award schemes. Today's webinar is slightly different from our usual format. It's going to last an hour, and we are going to have a series of short Q&As with industry experts on the topics that we're going to discuss today. Everybody who's registered for the webinar will be sent a link to a recording of the session, along with a summary of the key points. And if you've got a minute or two at the end of the session, we'd really appreciate if you would fill out the survey that's going to pop up, which will enable us to tailor the content of these webinars better for our audience in the future. We've got a fantastic panel today. We were originally going to do 5 trends, but unfortunately, Tom from Hill Group has succumbed to the dreaded flu that is doing the rounds. I am going to pick up with him in the new year to talk about the role of house builders in delivering build to rent inventory, because I think it's a great topic. So that may mutate into a podcast earlier in the new year. So we will pick up on that. But in the meantime, we've got 4 great experts to talk to us about 4 trends today. So, for our first trend, we are going to chat with Chen from Fifth Dimension about how AI is transforming every facet of real estate delivery and operations. Chen, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Would you just do a quick intro to yourself and Fifth Generation, and then we'll get stuck into the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, George. Thanks everybody for coming. And my name is Chen, and I'm the CTO of Fifth Dimension. We started 3 years ago. We are shipping the best-in-class AI workflows and skills and capabilities for commercial real estate in the world. So we have customers span across EU, UK, and US and APAC right now. And yeah, so that's us.
Excellent. Okay, Chen. So the topic of the trend is how AI is transforming every facet of real estate. You know that we're hearing a lot about AI. There's a lot of noise out there, and it's becoming a bit of a struggle to cut through some of that and know exactly how to implement it into your business, whichever area of the sector you're in. But from your perspective, what do you think is the single biggest operational function where you've seen AI deliver a real competitive advantage to the people who use it? And why is this particular area so ripe for disruption by AI?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Also, that's what we get asked by a lot of our customers, sales prospects in the past years. I would probably just single out one thing, which is document intelligence in the deal lifecycle. So that is a very interesting use case. And then the reason why I would say that is, well, the examples of that would be kind of lead summary, abstractions, any kind of due diligence extraction, etc. So this is where I think most people would land. A lot of our customers also land. And then there's a few reasons. A is, I think this is where the volume meets complexity. So a deal could be 50 documents, 200 documents. Generally, even if you have a very good team of humans, you can't maintain the same accuracy at that pace to go through every single document. The other thing, as we all know, I think time kills deals. And then you have to synthesize this many documents, lots of them, so hundreds of pages. And then it's just not possible for a human to do. And then lastly, I would say what people tend to ask the question when AI comes along first is that, does AI help me to do this 50% faster or 100% faster? I feel like now people are start asking the question about since like we can underwrite 3x the deal, which means we're a lot faster, but with the same team and catch the clause on page 87, I would have blown up the deal. So I think that is very, very different from simply saying that we're just going to do 20% or 50% kind of more deals, because there is accuracy, there is a risk element that everybody needs to take care of. But yeah, in general, just to recap, I think the getting the intelligence from just going through all the documents at the same level of accuracy, that would give you, I would say, the immediate kind of ROI that everybody can see today.
Yeah, thanks, Chen. I've noticed that a few people that I know who are real AI evangelists, I guess would be the term you'd use. They're so into it, and they're building their own GPT, and they're constantly nurturing it and feeding it and prompting it and refining it. And these guys are doing some really interesting things. But obviously, not everybody is um, going to be that engaged or that capable to do that. So, what's your stance on the kind of build versus buy debate that people always talk about in software? How does that apply specifically to AI solutions in real estate? Where are we at the moment?
Yeah, so obviously my answer will be biased because just disclaimer, as we are a AI vendor, what I would see us as being probably the most prominent kind of AI vendor right now across the pond between US and UK. So what we see last year was really, really interesting. When we talked to lots of sales prospects, generally there's a lot of experimentation budget within, especially the big firms. And then they also tend to have the resources individually or as a team or even as a department to really kind of use those budget to start building stuff that they find they could get the best ROI from. So this year, everything seems to have changed a little bit. I think everybody start getting really into funding the kind of best vendor to partner with, because I think there is the AI is here to stay, and there is a period of experimentation. It's fair, but I think today, especially towards the end of 2025, for us, we see a lot of firms start asking the question, not only just kind of who we partner with, but also who do we trust? I think that is actually a much better question to ask, as in, so, okay, so you build versus buy is one question, but then even if when you start buying, there's a lot of vendors in the market, and who would you trust that who is the right vendor in this case? So I would say definitely look for kind of the you already identified ROI in your kind of in the firm, and then just go for these use cases and bring those use cases to your vendor when you start kind of that buy journey, I guess.
Yeah. Are you starting to see your kind of customer profile change into a sort of broader group? And where do you think um, AI in general in your market has reached in terms of penetration? You know, how much more market share is out there to be won?
I I think we definitely generally our kind of core customer group hasn't changed that much, I would say. Um, but there's probably a kind of different adoption kind of phases across UK, US, and Europe. That's what I can see quite clearly. Obviously, the US firms are relatively more aggressive in terms of adopting AI, and then the leaderships are thinking a lot more what AI can do for us given our current organizational structure, and then they start thinking more about just as a firm at all, and how AI can help us as a firm. Whereas I think the rest of the world is still very much like we want to tap into AI just to show us the value first, and then we will think more systematically about what we can do with AI.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Let's talk a bit about the role of AI in a specific area. So, when it comes to predictive analytics for investment strategy, site selection, optimizing building design, all the stuff that's been done by analysts and so on in the past, what's AI's role in that whole process now, and how has it made the process quicker, more efficient, and you know how has that evolved?
Yeah, I think the short answer for this, I think everybody probably start realizing, but let me just make it clear because that's what we also see just from how our customers using our product is that AI is accelerating research, but AI is not replacing judgment. So when I said that, and everybody will understand what's happening here, is that I don't think AI is going to replace all your wonderful human actually doing deals and then sort of making the decisions, etc. I don't think that's AI is going to replace that. However, AI has this compression effect that you can feel very, very intimately about. You used to do research that takes you a few weeks, a few days with a team of analysts. Now you can compress that to maybe half an hour, 1 hour with a lot of the tools, including ours, on the platform. And that's significant. However, you have to know how to ask the right question, how to incorporate the insight from those research into your own analysis. I think AI just can't really help you with. The other thing is, I feel we see a lot of in terms of building design optimization, we see a lot of ESG stuff happening on our platform. And
Hmm.
then there's a lot of research on ESG, etc. Again, I think it's a great tool for researching. And the typical question is like, if we do this, what would be the carbon impact and the compliance status for that? And then that is the great question to ask. But if you want to just offload your whole ESG initiative to AI, I just don't think that's gonna lead to a very satisfactory outcome. So again, I think back to my point is that it's definitely accelerating research, all kinds of a deep dive, etc. But human judgment is still very important.
Yeah. And on a related subject to that, Chen, um, AI is here to stay. Human judgment is essential, but what skills should real estate professionals be focused on developing to remain essential and relevant in conjunction with the use of AI?
Yeah, great question. So it's also my favorite topic, if you like. I think as I mentioned for the previous question, so judgment with sort of AI compression, I think that is definitely the number one thing for me. Another thing which may not be as obvious as the human judgment aspect is that I think we all should start looking at how we do our work and then start structure the work to take into your AI partner into consideration. By that, I mean, let's say 5 years ago, all the work is done by a team of people, your colleagues and yourself. And then now I think a new way is emerging, which is you can do some of the work and then you should keep hold of a lot of the human judgment in your work. However, there is also a big part of work can be restructured, delegated to AI. And how you design and redesign your work to use all kinds of AI human workflow combining, that is going to be something that would significantly contribute to your baseline. The margins and baseline. So that's something I feel is going to be becoming more prominent in the space.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Chen. I forgot to mention earlier that as our speakers come on one by one, we'll be putting links to their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So if you'd like to get in touch with Chen and find out more about Fifth Dimension, then do drop him a line.
Yep.
Chen, thank you very much. We'll move
Thanks,
on
Jeff.
to our
Thanks,
second
everybody.
session now.
See you.
Bye bye, Chen. So now we're going to speak with Dan Smith, who actually wears two hats. So we're mainly going to talk about investment in the student accommodation sector, but Dan, you also work for an AI business as well, but your products is a bit more aimed at the operational side rather than the investment and delivery. So, is there anything you want to add very quickly about that before we move on to the PBSA side?
That was a very neat segue. Thanks very much for that, George. So I'm co-founder of VerbaFlo.AI. It's effectively my job to take it to market. And VerbaFlo is an AI communications platform, effectively helping operators of real estate to communicate with their residents and the residents to communicate, whether it's via WhatsApp, SMS, email, or over the phone. It's effectively an AI contact center. And it is totally transforming the way that a lot of different operators work. I mean, we've onboarded 200,000 beds now across PBSA and BTR in the UK and Europe, and that has effectively allowed them to streamline their systems. You don't necessarily need a CRM You don't need a Salesforce or a HubSpot necessarily anymore. But also think about their staffing and the seasonality of the way that they hire. So some of our larger clients don't necessarily need to hire up 3 people to chase first installments just before students are due to arrive, or don't necessarily need the larger sales teams. And this is definitely the direction of travel. So we've been doing this for a year. It's been incredibly well received. We've had 0 churn in terms of the number of contracted people that have stayed with us, and we're just launching in the US as well now. So I'm for those of you that can see me, I'm looking pretty tired. I'm definitely very jet lagged. It's not just that I've got an 8-week-old at home as well. So yeah, it's transforming real estate for sure, and this is just the start.
Yeah, excellent. It's pretty radical stuff. Okay, so if you want to talk to Dan more about that, then do contact him via LinkedIn with the link that's in the chat. So let's talk about our second trend. Why student housing is topping the living sector investment charts. There's been loads and loads of deals recently of all different kinds, and I've put some screen grabs on there from stories that we've run recently on Urban Living News, just to give you a taste of the sort of variety of the kind of deals that are being done. So portfolio deals, forward funding, and an interesting one there, Brookfield buying an HMO portfolio, which I suspect we're going to see a bit more of as delivery becomes difficult, and a record level of investment in UK PBSA in Q3. So Dan, from your perspective, what are the 2 or 3 sort of core factors that are causing student housing to be top of the living sector investors' wish list? Why is it top of the pops?
So let me just start by saying I am not an agent. I run Resi Consultancy, which works with investors and operators, typically helping them with best practice to understand where to buy and build and how to run those properties. We do that across PBSA, BTR, co-living primarily, but most of our work is within PBSA. And so I'm not invested deal side. It's not in my interest to talk up a market. And as a result, it's a bit more of a sort of nuanced approach. Yeah, PBSA, the long-term fundamentals, they are very strong, but there are, admittedly, some fairly large headwinds, as there are for most industries at the moment, especially if you're building and developing larger, taller properties in particular. But it's not just as simple as build it and they will come anymore. And that means that I think we're moving into a state of maturity. We have more long-term capital being attracted into the sector, which I think is a really positive thing. The fundamentals are still very strong, but it's no longer universal. You have to take a really focused approach on a city-by-city play. You have to start thinking about the amenities that you're offering, the services you're offering, but primarily about affordability. And this is one of the key things that is driving student decision-making across the board at the moment. Now, the real positives that we have within the sector previously, before COVID, we were building around 30,000 beds a year, new PBSA stock. And now we're building around 10,000 for various different reasons, obviously cost of capital, development, building safety regulator, people running a mile from that, and also the planning system as well. And so that constraint means that obviously any increase in student numbers will really positively affect that. And the good news about our student numbers at the moment is that undergraduate numbers look great. For this year in particular as well, UCAS numbers for the forthcoming year look really positive for undergraduate students in particular. Not so good for postgrads. We can come onto that a little bit later. But yeah, the fundamentals in that sense do look very positive, at least for the next sort of 5 or so years. So I think that's certainly a real positive. It's also very anti-cyclical in nature, PBSA, because what happens if there's some kind of economic downturn? Typically, students look to upsell. If there are no jobs in the market, they'll go and educate themselves. That's changing slightly with the advent of AI and a bit of a different focus on graduate outcomes. But overall, the long-term view is positive. I think as long as you are focused on offering the right product at the right price in the right location, those fundamentals are definitely still there.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the investor profile in the market and how that's evolving. You did allude to it earlier, and one of the slides there, we've got Australian Super, which is the biggest pension fund in Australia, who have sort of made a big splash in the sector recently. So is that typical of the kind of new players that are coming into the market now, rather than the more sort of PE players?
Yes, and I think that's a positive thing personally. I think the days of the sort of 1 year, 2 year hold and flip um, are gone in most locations. And that's because it's harder to fill. It is harder to fill beds without a shadow of a doubt. So the occupancy's dropped about 5% actually year on year. So, according to the latest students data, we're at about 86% average occupancy for PBSA across the board. And I think we're now in an era where if you hit 90% in most locations, you've done pretty well. You cannot just rely on underwriting 98% occupancy and an average rental increase of 5% year on year. That cookie cutter approach does not work anymore. So I think we're going to see less of that. And I think anyone who's kind of been caught up in that post-COVID boom will now really struggle in terms of what they've underwritten during that time where there was such pent-up demand post-COVID that our numbers went through the roof. We had record numbers of students. PBSA was full left, right, and centre. We could fill a lot more of BTR as well, but more on that shortly. But I think ultimately where we're at now is that it is definitely harder to fill those beds, and as a result, we're looking at getting more longer term institutional capital in because they are attracted to those long term fundamentals where they know that 3% year on year rental growth, they're comfortable with that. They don't need the double digit rent growth. And I've worked with a lot of PE firms and still currently do, and the typical cycle of that is first year focus on occupancy, second year drive the rents as much as you can, third year drive the rents, but also then reduce operating costs, and then maybe fourth year, that's when you're looking to have moved it on. But I think seeing the longer term pension funds and the institutional capital ploughing into PBSA in the UK, I think is a really positive thing because it gives us stability. There is this shift towards Russell Group in particular. Just look at Unite. Their focus at the moment is sell off old stock that is not aligned to their core focus of Russell Group universities. The reason for that is that there's a real flight to quality. So these tier 2 and tier 3 universities that may be struggling financially as well, they're the universities that students are moving away from. And more students are able to access the better universities, in part because they're happy to drop grade boundaries. But I think there is a real focus on that flight to quality. So with the long-term institutional capital, there is still an alignment to that flight to quality, to those top universities. But I do think the capital is becoming a bit more selective in terms of location, that price point, that product quality. And that's not, I don't think that means that, everyone's plowing into the premium sector. But yeah, there's much more of a sign of sector maturity. And I don't think that's a sign of weakness at all. But like I said at the start, I want to be really clear that the fundamentals of PBSA are very strong, in particular for those long-term institutional investors.
Yeah. Dan, you mentioned some positive projections for student numbers, but how is the student profile changing? And in terms of the overseas students who do fill a lot of these PBSA buildings, particularly the higher price point ones, how do you see that changing, and how might that change sort of investment and development strategies?
That is that's a great question because it's not just as simple as it used to be. And I think we've relied quite heavily on international markets propping up the higher education sector for starters, in terms of the tuition fees that they're paying, but also then in terms of PBSA, because we've only really been able to fill the premium end of the PBSA sector. And by that I mean not fill with students, by developing that stock, because you can only really develop premium stock. If you're building something now, you typically have to charge around £240 a week for a simple ensuite.
Yeah.
And and that means that puts it in the premium sector. So we're only filling that part of the development scale. Once you get to that tipping point of occupancy, becoming a bit of a challenge for premium because there's too much premium stock, everything starts sliding down that affordability scale. And so I think there have been certain cities where we've seen a complete recalibration in pricing, because we've got to the point where we've reached that tipping point in affordability, and primarily we've priced out even the most affluent of nationalities. Chinese normally have around £50 per week more to spend on their accommodation than Indian students or domestic UK students, but even they are now sliding down that affordability scale for various different reasons. Their economy and also their currency fluctuations, that's been a real issue for them. So I think that's reliance on international students has been a bit of a challenge ultimately for anyone building and buying right now, because they're not coming in the numbers that we were expecting into PBSA. Part of that is because they're also looking at BTR and co-living. Some of them are living with family as well. I've seen that firsthand. Various different universities have cohorts in and around where international students will go and live with family members, aunts and uncles, and various others. So the rise of the commuter student is a real challenge there as well. But yeah, international postgrad numbers are not looking good. That's one slight concern, especially that will affect the mid-range and the premium sector. But yes, the undergraduate numbers, they do look good from a domestic point of view and also from an international point of view. However, the issue that we'll face is affordability there. So we can have as many students studying at university as we want, but how does PBSA attract those to actually live in PBSA? We have to show value for money, and that's something we are getting much better at, I think. And this year, from conference season this year, and from all the conversations I'm having, I would say the phrase is positive realism. It feels like we've gone through the post-COVID boom. There's been some recalibrations in rents across entire cities now, and we now have more realistic investors who are actually listening to their operators, and that can affect those who have bought in the last year or two, who thought the post-COVID boom was the norm. But this is very much the normalization of demand, and I think that's where we need to make sure that we're still educating each of those investors that comes into the sector that it is not shooting fish in a barrel anymore. You can't just build it and they will come. And I think that's where I think we've got a bit of an obligation as a sector and with operators to really help to drive that narrative.
Finally, Dan, on a related point, how do you think the sector can address this affordability point with new product? How do you think the product is likely to evolve to address this?
It's incredibly difficult to build affordable. I don't think mandating affordability criteria, as we see in London and probably several other cities soon, realistically helps. I think building more definitely helps. We've seen that. Just look at Nottingham in particular, or Coventry or Sheffield, or probably Bristol fairly soon, where the more stock that you have, the lower the occupancy gets. Therefore, the rents drop as operators have to get more competitive year after year. So that is a real, I think that's the key driver to affordability is to continue building. And I think we need to be honest and open that, and an average occupancy in a city of about 80% means that everybody is competitive. All of the sectors can then be competitive, and we just need to be honest about setting those rents low rather than having the massive cashbacks at the end at the end of the season. So I think building more will help affordability. Like I said, it's very difficult to build affordable. I really like a play of repurposing old stock. I think there's a massive opportunity to work with universities to repurpose their older Gen 1 stock and also take some of the old private sector to stock to do a sustainability play, to improve the on-site power generation in particular, reduce those utilities costs, and because that's typically a third or 50% of your costs. So everybody should be looking at that and thinking about what the payback time is, what's the ROI there. And also then looking at amenities plays as well, because in an era of AI, we need to focus very much on that sense of community. And what PBSA does incredibly well is build that sense of community. And I think students are going to yearn for that. I think that there's affordable, and then there's the sort of sense of community that we can bring alongside that. So they're the two key themes that I try and work with any investors or universities on, trying to say, look, how can we make sure that this stock can be repurposed? You can put the money into the CapEx projects, but that you can still keep it affordable. Well, it's by long-term capital. And that's where we have to make sure that we have that long-term capital investing in the sector. And that's where the fundamentals are still so strong for PBSA in particular in the UK.
Yeah, brilliant. Great stuff. Thanks ever so much, Dan.
No
Appreciate it.
worries.
Okay, let's move on to our third trend now and welcome in Marianne from Ringley Group.
Good morning.
Hi, Marianne. Can you put your camera on and can you give us a quick intro to
Yeah, I'm
what you
just
do?
trying to check we're all set up. So camera should be on. No? Does that
Yeah, there
work?
you are. Yeah,
Yeah, hi. Okay.
there you are.
Hi, I'm Marianne Bowring. I'm the founder of the Ringley Group. Ringley's advisory property specialist across both facilities management, build to rent, leasehold, with solicitors, valuers, engineers, fire consultants, and all of the rest of the things that you need in the family. My journey in build to rent started supporting Moda Group, where we provided a bunch of advisory to help them understand how it is to operate buildings, and then moved on to Grosvenor, Patrizia, Long Harbour, Europa, Aberdeen, and a few others I've probably forgotten. So we've been involved right from the journey. We're involved in building design. We're involved in working out building efficiency during the build as part of the project team. We're involved in mobilisation, leasing, stabilised assets, preparing assets for sale. So sometimes we get stranded assets which we have to prepare for sale, and other times we get assets which potentially have been had finance problems, been repossessed, and we have to repurpose and decide what should be built, because build to sell is not the same as build to rent.
Yeah, excellent. Well, welcome along, Marianne. We're going to talk about why global investors are still targeting the UK living sector despite local headwinds. We've heard a lot over the last few months about the Building Safety Act, the Renters' Rights Act, the cost of finance, and so on. But if you look at the screen grabs on the page there, you'll see that these are just from the last few months. Some really big players from all around the world are investing in the sector here. So despite these headwinds, Marianne, what are the main attractions of the UK living sector to these overseas investors? Why are they getting involved?
Well, the UK has always been felt to be a safe haven for property and politically stable. And I guess because we export our language, we always have a buoyant student population, and a lot of people want to be here. In terms of the industry, in terms of living, it's estimated that 35 to 40% of the market in the next 10 years, investment market, will be living. So there's a huge pile of money wanting to come into living. There are some headwinds that make that difficult at the moment. There's nervousness around the building safety regulator and delays in the government gateway system. So there is possibly more money preferring at the moment single family housing because it seems to be simpler, less risky. I mean, the returns aren't as good because of that, but in theory, the churn is less and your money's locked away for longer. And the real drivers for that is yield compression can be achieved. So, of course, you buy the unit. Well, sorry, let's start from the developer's model. So the house builder is a cash business. So if the house builder isn't selling 2 to 3 plots a week, then he doesn't have cash to finish the next plots. So that's how house building operates. So the real play is for the investment market to change a house builder's model to forward fund them in the same way that the investment market forward funds a tier 1 or tier 2 contractor to build an office, that will become a new play in the way that we get residential built. So if we forward fund developers, then they don't have the problem of a diminishing sales market, because there's still challenges there with interest rates, earnings, wage inflation, and everything else. So that gets the unit built. Single family housing then benefits from, of course, professional management. It benefits from lower churn. It benefits, there's exponentially more sites suited to it, because almost, 15, 20 minutes outside any central business district, there will be opportunities for single family housing. The play then is really to amass portfolios, and then service them even more efficiently than efficient, because you can then share roaming staff and get a play there. And then on a portfolio size of perhaps 4,000 units, you're looking at yield compression. So if the yield was 4.25, you might get your yield down to 4.05. And at scale, that will make a huge difference to the value of the portfolio. So a lot of money's interested in that. We're also seeing interest in money that wants a quicker return. And for that type of money, permitted development is a good option. So there is still play in office buildings to be converted, particularly some of the perhaps 1980s office buildings that look a little bit more like, well, they kind of look a bit residential if you think about it. They're not glossy and full of glass, etc. They are mostly brick. They have got windows. They have got a pitched roof. So, they're halfway to being residential with some thoughtful redesign. There's quite a play there. I think the thing for the money there is your returns and stabilisation can start almost 12 months after you've deployed your cash. So in the single family housing model, the play is that perhaps you could take over 10 plots a week. So you're actually PC mobilised, which makes it a very, very efficient way to mobilise. Whereas in a multi-family building, you've got to PC 300 units and then sit with half of them empty while you gradually fill up your building. The PD gives you a quicker route to that. PD schemes tend to be around 100 to 150 units, possibly some down at sort of 70, 80. So again, there's not so much critical mass. Take the building, fill it, and that's a shorter play for your return. Difficulties with the PD appetite is that it depends what you're refurbishing. We're doing one at the moment for Silbury Capital in Reading. So the exterior of the building isn't really going to have much work done on it. So inside the building, we will have grade A BTR. We will have everything EPC grade B, energy efficient appliances, MVHR, heat pumps. So all of the things with the amenities and the wayfinding will be perfect. But of course, outside, you've still got a building with an original roof, with the tarmac on the car park 10 years old. So, you've got to look at the yield's going to be affected by that. So the PD does have a different play. I think the market will come back for the mainstream build to rent probably the latter half of next year. That's very sad because we need lots of it. But really, the government needs to be banging its drum and, getting this building safety regulator moving faster. The challenge, of course, is nobody wants a building sitting empty in a paperwork exercise for 9 months, because that could be £3 million of rent that's just walked out the door. So we need those messages from central governments. I mean, Homes England have a huge appetite to get Britain building. They're the ones really living the directive from the government. And I also work for Housing Growth Partnership, which is a Lloyds fund, Lloyds banking initiative. And our role there is to help developers get the development funding for a share of their profits. So, there are lots of kind of quasi government initiatives out there to get Britain building. But of course, that doesn't really stop the viability on interest rates, which is a problem. And it doesn't stop the fact that construction shortages exists. However, construction prices have begun to fall back a little bit. But the problem is things never really go down after they've gone up hugely. And you have to wait for kind of land prices, output values to adjust, and then the market takes a new shape. So we're a little bit of limbo. I think that's the message. But there are pockets of, hope and desirability in many, many sectors. And in the long term, the UK is always seen as a stable place, well regulated generally, in order to invest your money.
Do you think, Marianne, that these global investors in the short term will be looking to not take on development risk and acquire existing trading assets and platforms until the environment gets more straightforward for development?
Yeah, well, I suppose so. So, I mean, if you look at single family housing, arguably you don't necessarily have development risk if you're partnering up with Vistry, for example.
Mm.
So that's a good way in to not take development risk. I think the appetite to take development risk is based on two things, really: international steel and construction prices and local tenders and availability of labour. So those things are becoming more normalized, if you like, which will help. I think in the UK at the moment, it's mostly the building safety regulator that's driving the fear on that. And also, of course, don't forget that building regulations changed significantly, just nearly 2 years ago, or 2 years next year. And the swathe of stock coming through where everybody put the spade in the ground, even if they weren't ready to build, to try to avoid a higher standard to hold yourself to, has petered out. So we've kind of got to wait for the new stock to come through at new prices with new building regs. And that's only really gone into construction the last 6 to 9 months, because it was sort of spring last year that you could avoid most of that, and now you can't. Yeah, markets are strange things. They take time to adjust, but I think we're on the right path.
Just one more question for you, Marianne. Are you seeing much overseas appetite, particularly on the institutional side, for co-living? Is that a sector that you think is sort of starting to come of age?
Co-living isn't widely understood, I think, is the reality. But then if you're getting money from places like Japan, then of course it is understood. There are other, cities around the globe which are living in more compact spaces and living the lifestyle experience culture as opposed to the possessions and long stayers culture. I think co-living is good, as it can de-risk students. I know we've just heard a lot about student from your last speaker, but fundamentally student numbers will be on a downward trend. There is rhetoric out there that some universities might not survive. And of course, if students can't bring their families with them in the way that they could 3, 4, 5 years ago, then there's going to be a market change. I mean, many BTR buildings have an element of student in them, and there are shortages, and co-living really is a way to hedge your bets and, replace some of the student without taking the risk of the student. That said, I'm working on a site in Plaistow, and there the council have put a restriction on the co-living that you can't have students in the building. That's a bit of a difficulty because there isn't another PBSA competitor, so why would they do that? And then you get into the definition of, well, what is a student and who is studying? And if I'm at night at school, am I a student? If I'm a postgrad, am I a student? It gets really, really difficult. Co-living is great for two applications, really. Perhaps in the commuter towns around key worker nodes. So superb use of potentially hospital land on hospital sites. So there's opportunity for JVs there. And it works in, London, Birmingham and major cities. I don't necessarily think it's going to go further out into wider towns, but you've got to look at your student towns first, your key worker nodes, and then work out from there.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Marianne. As with all our speakers, Marianne's LinkedIn profile is posted in the chat, so if you want to carry on the conversation with her, do drop her a line. So now we're going to move on to our final trend, which has just been alluded to there actually in our chat with Marianne, and this is about why office-to-resi is the way forward in a lot of cases for the living sector. And here to talk to us about that is Will from IMMO Capital. We're going to do a quick introduction and then we'll get stuck in.
Hi, George. Yeah, thanks very much, and hello everyone. Yeah, so I'm Will. I'm director and head of investments UK at IMMO Capital. We're an end-to-end residential operator focused on the corners of the market, not typically accessed by institutions. So a bit of a mouthful there, but that's what we're focused on. And office to resi is one of our new flagship strategies that we're working on with a number of partners throughout London.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. And again, if you look at the screen grabs from some recent news stories on there, you can see that office to resi is making its mark in every asset class of the living sector. So some examples there across PBSA, co-living and build to rent. So it is a really vibrant part of the market. Will, there is a lot of office stock on the market at the moment. Obviously, not all of it is going to be suitable for a resi conversion. So when you're looking at a potential building, what are the essentials? What does it absolutely need to have to make it viable for an office to resi conversion?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good starting point is acknowledging that not all stock is suitable. And I think, it was only very recently that my colleague came to me and said we should look at doing office to resi with IMMO, and I turned my nose up initially. I'm not ashamed to say that. And that's primarily because my experience and my exposure to office to resi conversions historically has been very, very poor. So there's a lot of very poor quality stock that sort of seeped its way into the market and has taken hold of what we think today as being office to resi, but it is capable of being a very high quality institutional product, provided that you get the fundamentals right. And for us, I think firstly, always will be a focus on location. One of the benefits of office to resi is it's often located in some of the most well-connected, highly amenitized locations, in iconic locations that you can't typically access through greenfield or brownfield sort of ground up development sites. So I think that's number one. Secondly, I would say Mary Rose referenced it. It's something quite it feels quite reductive, but if something looks like it is um, uh, capable of being a normal resi product, you tend not to get a discount on the back end of your assets. If it looks and feels like a more conventional build to rent or block of apartments. So having that sort of more traditional brick built form as a starting point really helps. And it also means you're less likely to be doing major interventions and structural changes on the build too. And then one of the most sort of important things for us is access to sort of natural light. So having those shallow floor plates and ample natural light through sort of consistent windows. I tried to speak to my development director just before joining this panel, and he was talking to me about fenestrations and the internal rhythm of the apartments. Slightly out of my depth speaking to those points, but ultimately what you want is a more conventional residential product, and you can design that in by selecting some of the smaller blocks with those shallower floor plates.
Yeah. Um, what are the rough cost comparables per square meter for office conversion versus new build? I know this is a constantly
Yeah.
fluctuating scale, and it obviously does vary from project to project. But if you can just give us a kind of, a rough approximation.
Yeah, so look, I think you're not too far off what you would be looking at. Certainly, if you're building an institutional product, you're probably not too dissimilar to what you're paying for a ground up development. So you're in the sort of £200 to £250 per square foot. But I think that is a bit of a red herring, if I'm being honest. The main sort of strategy driver behind Office to Resi cannot and should not be purely on the basis of value and cost of delivery. And again, I think it was alluded to earlier, one of the main benefits of Office to Resi and why it does stack up is because you're able to compress your programs quite a bit. And
Mm.
so a lot of the capital that is sloshing about in the market right now is IRR driven and requires those compressed timeframes to be able to make the returns stack up. So it's not necessarily just about the costs, it's about the broader context of the transaction and the delivery piece, and those routes to market of being in those slightly smaller blocks in those very well located, very well connected locations. And I think that's really important to sort of not focus on the cost piece primarily, purely because of that point I made earlier about there being, a deluge of poorer quality stock in the market. And in effect, what we had, is a race to the bottom style market whereby, slightly less scrupulous developers were delivering bargain bucket developments, and that was able to persist for quite a long time. And I think in order to transition to a more institutional marketplace with those institutional products, you need to acknowledge you need institutional inputs too, and that means paying a premium for your build cost up front too.
Well, what are you seeing amongst attitudes with the planners? Are they becoming more in favor of office to resi rather than demolishing a new build? And are attitudes the same across the country, or does it vary much regionally?
Yeah, so I think to be slightly cliched, it's consistently inconsistent at the local level. And
Mm.
that's one of the challenges we faced. It really does depend which borough authority you're speaking to. What I would say is there is a broad consensus, top down, that we should look towards retrofit and reuse first. And that is starting to trickle its way through into the day-to-day management of this strategy and delivery of this strategy. I would say the places where we have the most productive and informed conversations tend to be in the inner city London boroughs, where the policies and design principles are more properly established and well documented. And ultimately, if we're moving towards a more institutional product again, not to keep laboring this point, you do need to have checks and balances on what you're able to deliver. And fundamentally, if everyone's being held to the same standards, it means that there's a more competitive marketplace from which you can deliver into and build a better quality product. So I would say, in inner city London definitely tends to have a more pragmatic a more productive approach to office to resi naturally. And I think these are the locations where supply is most constrained. And so the office to resi story makes most sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're starting to see glimmers of hope regarding new build viability. There was a well-documented project last week or the week before, I think, that got through Gateway 2 in 13 weeks, which is only 1 week outside of the BSR's target. There has been a shake-up at the BSR, and hopefully it looks like things are starting to move in the right direction. Do you think if new build viability improves significantly over the next couple of years, that the office to resi trend will continue as strongly as it is, or will new build take preference again for most developers?
Yeah, look, it's incredibly hard to predict, but what we do know is that all sectors do tend to be somewhat cyclical, and I think that's just a natural part of being in a market where there are multiple options at your disposal. So I think that's important to acknowledge first up. I think secondly, part of the what we've just discussed in terms of the structural drivers behind the need to do PD. And the sort of restore to core conversion strategy is that you don't have unless you can find down the back of the sofa, George, millions of beds in land banks in these very densely populated urban locations, which I don't think we can. You will need to look at more innovative ways of delivering those new homes. And I think fundamentally that's where office to resi has an enduring part to play in the delivery of new homes in the living sector. So I think fundamentally, yes, there will be some elements of cyclicality, and it may fall out of favor in the next sort of 18 months. But fundamentally, these are some of the most iconic locations that you can't access any other way. And specifically, if you're focusing on the best in class built form assets, tend to be smaller and lend themselves towards delivering balanced communities, then I think fundamentally that will endure multiple market cycles.
Excellent stuff, Will. Thank you very much. Right, we're just going to show a couple of quick slides before we wrap up. Thank you to all our speakers for their input today. I think we've had some really interesting conversations, some great insight, and keep an eye out on these trends over the next 12 months. Our next webinar, which is going to be on January the 16th, is going to be a bit more of a deep dive into how tech is enhancing operations in the living sector. It's called the Tech-Enabled Operator, AI Customer Experience and Hyper-Efficient Management. And that's taking place, as I say, on January the 16th. The link to register for that session is in the chat. If you'd like to work with us at Urban Living News, whether on our digital or in real life offers, do get in touch with my rather festive looking colleague there, Sam, whose details are on the screen and also in the chat. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. Thanks again to our speakers for another great session. I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. Have a good break, get recharged, come back firing in the new year, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar soon. Thanks very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
At IHM, we believe in the power of connection. We exist to inspire, to inform, and to unite decision makers who are shaping the future of hospitality and real estate. Our why is simple. We believe this industry thrives when people and ideas come together. And we're here to make that happen. So how do we do it? We publish 4 leading multimedia brands, each a trusted voice in its sector. We blend intelligent content, curated events, and a strong community into everything we do, making it easy, accessible, and genuinely useful. From online engagement to face-to-face connection, we are known for being insightful, collaborative, and refreshingly human. We host world-class events, panel discussions, podcasts, award ceremonies, and webinars designed to spark ideas, drive conversation, and create impact. With over 62,000 monthly web visitors, 55,000 email subscribers, and 69,000 social media connections. Our reach is deep and our community is active. We're partnered with the biggest names in hospitality, and we'd love to connect with you. So whether you're looking to grow your visibility, meet the right people, or understand where the market's heading, read, watch, listen, and me. Do it all with IHM.